One of the most interesting things about doing these near daily streams is that even though I've been doing them so often and you would think I'd be used to them by now, it's still just that moment right before going live where I just kind of go and psych myself up to hit the go button. So let's go ahead and get started. By the way, I'm Brian Lusk. Welcome to the channel. We're going to go into the news that's going on in Ukraine right now. And let me tell you, there's a lot of crazy things going on. There was a 1915 era salvage ship that was struck in Sevastopol Bay. There's the U.S. aid got past the Senate over the weekend. We've got a unit that actually broke and ran over in, unfortunately, on the Ukrainian side and allowed the Russians to take their positions. There's a lot of things going on. Let's go ahead and get right on into it. There's so much going on, and I just don't want to miss any of it as we go through it. So let's go ahead and get started with that the ship Kommuna. I'm sure it's pronounced Kommuna or something like that. This is from yesterday. The video is showing a vessel burning in Hollandia Bay. And as of that point, it was still burning. So there is a later information reports. The Russians always say it was a minor fire, and there were no injuries. Then other later updates indicate that two members of the Russian Naval Auxiliary Fleet were wounded after this attack. They claim to have intercepted the missile, and then, of course, the debris of the missile impacted the ship. I am amazed at the tremendous accuracy of debris that from the Ukrainian side. I am. It's so amazing how they always hit military assets with the debris of those missiles. Anyway, whether it was a deliberate targeting or not, there are multiple reports on this one. Potentially that there was another military ship that they were targeting. This is also a military ship. It's used primarily in the salvage role, not as a primary warship. But yeah, it's they're still looking for actual reports on the actual damages that occurred to it. But either way, it's pretty clear that once again the ship's going to be taken out of service for a while. There are rumors that this ship was all used to recover some of the pieces and equipment off of the Moskva, but I don't have any confirmation of that, and so I can't absolutely speak to it authoritatively. But again, it can't be used for any relevant purpose for right now, just because of the damage, and we'll be monitoring as we go. The Institute for the Study of War talked about this. Ukrainian forces struck and damaged the Russian Black Sea Fleet's Kommuna submarine support ship, the world's oldest active duty naval vessel. And I will push back on that characterization. USS Constitution has been in an active naval vessel since I believe it was 1780 something, but it's not used in active combat or active missions because it's a wooden sailing frigate, and it's certainly far more valuable as a floating museum than it is as a combat vessel in the modern era. So, if you go from the perspective of a relatively modern ship, I could see it being the world's oldest active duty naval vessel. The Russians do claim that they intercepted it with a Ukrainian anti-ship missile. The Ukrainians reported that one of their Neptune missiles were used, and the debris are what struck the Kommuna. The ship did go through a modernization in 2016 to perform deep sea work, which was obviously used if they actually did use it to work on the Moskva. They do report that the Russian missile cruiser. Sorry, let me back up here. Pletenchuk reported that the Kommuna previously performed rescue operations in the area of the sunken Russian missile cruiser Moskva and large landing ship Sazar Kunikov, and that the Russian forces would be unable to perform similar rescue and retrieval operations without the Kommuna. So they are losing a capability by removing this ship from the board. But this overall, again, though, the damage does not sound like it's extensive. And this, as I recall, is a Russian built ship. They should have all the ability to modernize and repair it without any kind of needing to go to outside sources for it. And without further information, we'll be finding out on the fly what happened. Next big item of conversation here: U.S. aid to Ukraine passed the House of Representatives over the weekend. It passed by a handy margin, so it wasn't even a close one. The bill now goes to the Senate for final approval, and then to President Biden to sign it. There's no expectation that it'll have any trouble going through the Senate. However, Senator Mike Lee has already been calling for 41 Republicans to oppose the bill and thus kill it before it can actually go out the door. I have commentary on that, but I will reserve that for another venue and just want to observe. Never mind. I'll hold that for later for now. Hi, Jerry. Glad to have you on board. Always glad to see you here. So the U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee Chairperson, Senator Mark Warner, reported on April 21st that U.S. provisions of military aid to Ukraine, including long-range ATACMS, will be in transit to Ukraine by the end of the week, if the Senate passes the supplemental appropriations bill on April 23rd and Biden signs it by April 24th. This tells me a few things. Now, having it in transit is not exactly a time frame. However, there's been a lot of conversation about the status of military aid. Some people have forwarded that they have got pre-positioned supplies sitting in Europe, ready to just be trucked right into Ukraine. Some people say Poland, others say other locations. But there's also the possibility that they may have literally anticipated this and have loaded up and prepared the necessary transport aircraft and ships to start the material already just loaded and ready to go and start it flying and floating right away. I don't know that. I am not privy to that level of information, but I have seen people that are far more knowledgeable on the U.S. military's logistics chain that have stated that any loadmaster worth his salt is already prepared for this, already has all the tables lined up, all the numbers calculated, and every last inch accounted for in every piece of hardware that they'll be sending. Biden did advise President Zelensky that he will sign the aid bill as soon as the Senate approves it. I imagine that there is no reason this could not be done quickly once the Senate approves it. Again, assuming it does. At this point, I see no reason to believe that it will not pass the Senate. The numbers are there. It's controlled by the Democrats by just, I believe, 1 or 2 votes. It's super tight, or a few votes, I should say. And the overall situation in the Senate is far more robust compared to the House, mainly because the leadership was holding it back. Speaking of the leadership, Johnson did perform an about-face on the situation with the aid and brought it to the floor. And honestly, that's really all anybody was asking him to do, because once it would get to the floor, it was virtually guaranteed to pass the House. But he had been blocking it. Now, there's a lot of people talking about that, and I've got a whole bunch of information talking about that, people speculating, and the whole 9 yards. Multiple politicians have stated that it wouldn't have gone through without Donald Trump's approval, or at least a tacit promise not to oppose. So we know that right before Johnson brought the bill to the House, he actually went to Mar-a-Lago and had a visit with Donald Trump. We don't know what was said or done, but when he got back from that meeting, he immediately said that they were going to bring the bill to the floor. So That started the necessary measures there to get it moving, and it has moved forward. There are people that say that it was because of a briefing that he received from the intelligence community talking about the situation. But there is something that I think has more uh, pull when it comes to Mike Johnson. Russia's relentless campaign to purge Ukraine of evangelical Christians played a big role in changing Speaker Johnson's views on support for Ukraine aid. And I could absolutely see that being the case. If the one of the big lies that Russia puts out there is this concept that Russia is defending Christianity, that they're protecting Christians, and yet they are oppressing and killing Christians in Ukraine. They are destroying churches and sacred sites. They are destroying Christianity, or at least evangelical Christianity in Ukraine, in favor of the Russian Orthodox Church, Moscow Patriarchate. So this, I believe, accounts for Johnson's change of heart. Is it true? Cannot confirm. But of all the theories I've seen as to why Johnson switched sides, or not switched sides, changed his tune, this is the one that most resonates for me. Is it the absolute truth? Can't promise. We'll have to see what shakes out in the end. According to Bloomberg, U.S. aid can give Ukraine a respite, but quick battlefield shift is unlikely, and I agree with that. It's going to take time to get that hardware and equipment onto the front lines. In the meantime, it appears that Ukraine is making the most of knowing that is coming. There was a video showing 16 ATACMS missiles being launched at nearly the same time, which indicates that they are not holding those in absolute reserve right now and are instead using them to try and change the situation on the battlefield right now. Jens Stoltenberg from NATO stated that the U.S. delay in aid had real consequences in Ukraine. That's 6 months of not having enough bullets and equipment and artillery shells and replacement parts and rifles and all the equipment necessary to wage a war and beat Russia back. And those real consequences are Ukrainian blood. President Zelensky stated that U.S. aid gives Ukraine a chance at victory. I think this support will really strengthen the armed forces, I pray, and we will have a chance at victory if Ukraine really gets the weapons system. Senator Warner, like I mentioned earlier, said that ATACMS could be en route by the end of the week, and I have no reason to doubt that timeline. German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock called the U.S. House of Representatives vote to provide billions in new military aid to Ukraine a decisive breakthrough. According to her, that this was not only a good and important moment for Ukraine, but also an important moment for securing the European peace order. I think, I don't remember if it was Churchill or some other British personality said, you can always rely on the Americans to do the right thing after they've already tried everything else first. And this might be kind of that same moment. 6 months without that aid means that there's been a lot of payment for the lack of aid. And again, that's in the form of injured and killed. Ukrainian defenders, there's a lot of these videos. I've got this one is just a representative of it. I'm going to go ahead and just play it for you.
4 days ago, this kindergarten in Donetsk Oblast was destroyed by Russian invasion. Now, thanks to the support of the American people, Ukraine will lead the world in stopping this terrorism and genocide. Slava Ukraini! God bless America!
Doggone it, those guys know how to say thank you. You know, this is the There are so many videos along these lines of Ukrainian soldiers on or near the front lines taking a few moments to get this thank you video out and sent to the social media people to get it posted immediately. And the addition of "God Bless America" um, absolutely hits home. ATACMS coming, big change on the battlefield. These are the long-range ATACMS. They're 300 kilometers. Everything except for the very tip of Crimea is within range of the current lines as they sit, including the Kerch Bridge. And this is probably why there's been such a huge push by Russia to try and stop not just the aid from coming, but to try and push the Ukrainians back, to try and get the Kerch Bridge out of range of these longer range ATACMS missiles. They've wanted this to happen before Ukraine gets that aid. It's a gets I hate to say game changer. It's a big deal though. That said, no amount of aid is going to make the difference unless the Ukrainians are able to use it properly and with little reservation. So we'll see how this turns out in the end. Bill Keating, U.S. Congressman, also talked about the U.S. weapons to Ukraine coming sooner than anyone thinks it's possible. There's no stone left unturned in terms of getting them over there. So really, yes, this is the U.S. logistics system for their military is second to none. There's a YouTuber goes by Fat Electrician, would absolutely say you'll get to learn why the U.S. doesn't have a healthcare system, or he calls it an unhealthcare system. It seems that the approval of aid for Ukraine by the U.S. Congress came as a big surprise to Russia, according to Anton Herashchenko. He says, based on their reactions, that there is no plan B, and they believe there would be no help from the United States. But it looks like with this additional aid, it'll mean that that Ukraine will be able to destroy the remnants of the high-tech modern parts of Russia's army and take it back to the 20th century, knocking them back 50 years in tech. They're already bringing out T-80 tanks that aren't modernized. They're bringing out T-72s that aren't modernized. They've actually fielded T-55s and T-62s, which, roughly speaking, if you hear the number on the end of a T for Russian tanks, it's near the year it was released, though there's some jiggly room on that. But that gives you a hint as to how old that equipment is. This is stuff that was manufactured shortly after World War II. Now, conversely, the stuff that we're sending to Ukraine is pretty much Cold War era design. The Bradley is not a new vehicle, and the models we're sending are not the latest variants. They're 80s era equipment. They're often have been given some upgrades, but are not brought up to the current standard. So overall, we've got basically American 80s hardware going against Russian 70s and 60s hardware. Still, the American gear kicks their butts when they've got enough of it to use it. Meanwhile, says Anton, NATO and China continue to increase their high-tech weaponry stocks. Russia is playing tactics in Ukraine and losing strategically. In a direct confrontation with NATO, it has less and less chances. The report is that there is a larger than normal aid package that is being prepared for them, including Bradley IFVs, Humvees, air defenses, artillery shells, and more M113 armored personnel carriers. And Intel Crab says this could happen quite soon. Keep an eye on cargo flights to Sheshuf this week. And I'm sure I'm a little bit wrong on that pronunciation. I just know it's not what it looks like. So that's over in Poland, and that's where a lot of this hardware is going through to get to Ukraine. Moving on to news out of Ukraine itself, the Russians have targeted a TV tower in Kharkiv. This would be on April 20, actually today. They targeted today and caused half of the mast to collapse. Now, from my knowledge of radio and television and broadcast equipment, this is not a cheap fix. They're not going to be up there with a welder putting these two pieces back together. So we're talking this tower is out of service for some time. That said, they shot it in half. So with a little bit of creativity, especially if the antenna, their broadcast antenna is still intact, they could mount it farther down. This would result in a smaller coverage area until they can get the tower replaced or repaired. But it's just because the tower's been knocked in half doesn't mean they're entirely down and out. Though it will take a while to repair, to replace, actually, would be the proper term. They could work in the meantime, assuming they've got the technical skills and know-how, which I have no reason to believe they don't. Lots of video of the portions of this antenna on the ground. The strike appears to have been pretty darn precise, to be honest. Managing to tag a tower-sized item in order to knock it in half like this, pretty darn precise strike there on this television tower. They believe it was hit by a Russian X-59 missile. The tower employees, by the way, the television employees were not on the tower or near it at the time. They were in shelter because of the air raid sirens. So no injuries. Video of the tower being struck. You can see the smoke there and the remains of the tower. Oh, let me back up here. The tower falling over there, the smoke from the strike. That is quite the visually impressive strike. And a second run of it right there, a little bit closer. President Zelensky reported that the reason they lowered the draft age is because the younger generation is both fit and they're technically savvy. And that actually does make sense. Yes, they may be physically fitter than the older men, but more than anything else, these are guys that have been raised with technology. I was in probably one of the first generations to actually be raised with some semblance of modern technology, but even I saw the advent of cell phones and internet and high-speed wireless telecommunications, networking and TCP/IP. Some of those technologies obviously predated me, but by and large, I was one of the earliest to actually grow up with it, considering my home life at the time. So this generation here. I grew up with it. This generation lived it. It's their bread and butter. It's their life right there. They know this technology as far as that goes, probably even better than I do from a natural perspective. Valery Zaluzny, former commander of Ukraine's military forces, has been confirmed as the ambassador to the United Kingdom. I think this is a great move for him and for Ukraine. He knows what is really needed on the battlefield, and he can make those conversations with their reliable partner, Britain. A rare computer virus was detected in a Ukrainian network with potentially compromising some confidential documents, but the cybersecurity firm that found it states that it looked like the work of an inventive but relatively inexperienced developer. The bigger concern is how did it get in, and thus where is the hole in their security arrangements? And in Ukraine, they created a smart kamikaze drone that can determine its own targets using AI. Now, my understanding is that there is still a human being that has to hit the button and say yes, go for it. And but in the end, it's still independently able to avoid objects that fly in its direction, which would mean it could potentially avoid enemy drones. It could potentially avoid enemy anti-aircraft fire or missiles, and still deliver to its target. Really interesting. Hi, Paul. Glad to have you here. Well, Jerry says, hey, what about that 30 bits per second phone line to operate an IBM Selectric terminal? You know, I'm pretty sure that wasn't running TCP/IP back then, Dad, Jerry. So, maybe you could tell me I'm wrong on that one, but pretty sure no. But that's just what I think. Moving on to the news out of Russia. German materials firm Knauf to withdraw from Russia. I didn't know they were still operating in Russia, but it says that they're going to cease operations in Russia in light of current events. There was no specific reason given for the withdrawal, but they did come under scrutiny earlier this month for their alleged involvement in the reconstruction of Russian occupied Mariupol. Some of their supplies and equipment did show up in reconstruction projects there, and it looks like they got a little bit too much bad press. Over in Voronezh, the Elmash electromechanical plant is on fire, or it was as of yesterday. This is a 3,000 square meter fire. And this is plant, by the way, builds gearboxes, geared motors, shoe brakes, industrial fans, and also specializes in electric motors. So this would be a vital plant for Russia's war machine here. And to have it be taken out by this type of a fire, especially one so large as 3,000 square meters, is a big blow to Russia. They do report that that fire has been extinguished and that 3 people died as a result of it. According to Crimean Wind, at the end of 2023, Russia ranked third in defense spending after the United States and China, spending $109 billion, or 5.9% of their GDP. This was the highest level recorded since the collapse of the Soviet Union, according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. Ukraine, on the other hand, took 8th place, amounting to 59% of the Russian expenses. But with Western military assistance, they really think that's about 91% of Russia's military expenses. But they do point out that Russia has a far-flung country to protect. They have other things they want to do, such as in Africa and other places. So their resources are spread a little bit thin. So they, even though they are investing more money, they have more things they've got to protect by doing so. The interesting thing is that Russia has actually been pulling back like their peacekeepers out of Nagorno-Karabakh and are basically pulling back everything they can and likely redeploying it to Ukraine. Whereas Ukraine, every penny they get for defense goes straight to the war effort. And as an interesting aside, due to the flooding going on in Russia, in the Kurgan region of Russia, old wells of the Dobrovolnoy deposit, where one of Rosatom's enterprises mined uranium, flooded. The uranium solution could have flowed into the Tobol River, according to environmentalists. Radioactive mud into a river that's used for drinking water. And these are old wells that have had years to, with water in the bottom of them, to leach out the uranium and get it into it. This could be quite the disaster for the drinking water and for the ecosystem in the area. We will see. Moving on to the international front. There was another protest on the Polish checkpoints that went for most of the day. It was reportedly over some hours later. In fact, let me pop over here. I've got it here. Some hours later, it was reported as being over, at least at some of the crossing points. Poland has been fighting with those protesters quite a bit lately, and they have said that they can't use force against them. I mean, I can understand at least that position. But they are willing to try and help in other ways. However, they have specifically stated they cannot transfer patriots to Ukraine, but can provide other help. They're trying to rebuild their own reserves of air defense systems, and being right there on the border with Belarus, they're nervous. In that same vein, Poland has been in negotiations with the United States to potentially deploy nuclear weapons on their territory. They say they are willing and ready to allow NATO allies to deploy nuclear weapons there, and the negotiations, as my understanding is, are ongoing. Every country is going to want a piece of the nuclear pie now, considering how well Russia's nuclear saber rattling is rattling the West and keeping everybody at bay, letting them invade Ukraine almost with impunity. Almost, but not quite. Sweden's defense minister doesn't rule out sending Patriots to Ukraine. They do. I think they were talking between 1 and 2 they may be able to send. I don't have good information beyond that, but it is interesting. The private financing arm of the World Bank plans to invest 1.9 billion in projects in Ukraine over the next 18 months. I believe these are reconstruction projects, not like military industrial complex items like that, but we'll see. Norway will provide Ukraine with new contributions, including funding to improve the country's air defense. So Norway's stepping up to the plate. Spain and Greece have been getting a lot of pressure from EU states to step up air defense supplies to Ukraine. Both of them have Patriot systems and are not currently in a conflict. Greece is hesitant, though. They're willing to do so. But if they do, they want some real guarantees from the United States specifically, not just European Union, but from the United States that if Turkey invades or attempts to attack Greece, that the United States will be there. Because there's been a little bit of tension over there. Latvia's education ministry has decided they will gradually phase out Russian as a second foreign language in the country's schools. It sounds like they've actually got some schools that teach entirely in Russian over there, and they are now ending that program entirely, bringing all of their citizens into the regular language programs. Russian language is gradually becoming less and less popular over in the European Union. Ironically, at one point in time, I sort of wanted to learn Russian, kind of know more about the people we were staring at with nuclear weapons all those years. And I'm not so sure I'm so motivated now. In Slovakia, I mentioned this the other day. At the time, I think it was 1.8 million euros that they had actually managed to raise. Turns out the Slovakian citizens, despite their government saying there was no way, no how that they were going to provide money for Ukraine, the citizens of Slovakia have managed to scrape together 3 million euros for ammunition for Ukraine. This will go into the Czech initiative to get them artillery shells. Okay. I've already talked about this. I have that highlighted because I actually found out how you pronounce this name. I'm just going to go ahead and play it here. Get that on and
Jonas Gahr Støre.
Jonas Gahr Støre. And just again, Norway is all over this, helping out. Sweden is also possibly going to send RBS-70 short-range air defense systems to Ukraine. The range, yes, obviously longer range is better, but they need all aspects of air defense in Ukraine. You can't intercept everything at 200 miles. You're going to have to get some at 20 miles and some at 2 miles. Otherwise, things are going to get through. I already talked about Poland for a little bit. Let's move over to Moldova for just a moment or two. A group of opposition people, basically Russian-sponsored people, have united into an electoral bloc. Now, this is my understanding. I don't have a good view of how things work in Moldova specifically, but one of the things we see across many nations in Europe is individual parties are tiny things, little individual, almost special interest groups is what we'd call them here. But those are political parties in many of the places in Europe. And when a government is formed, often they have to put together a coalition of different of these small parties to get enough together to put together an actual functioning government, one that has enough votes to actually govern the nation. Well, it looks like the Moldovan, Russian, the people that are supporting Russia in Moldova have managed to unify their political effort and become an electoral bloc. This is with multiple pro-Russian Moldovan actors and parties. The thing is, by doing this, it's intended to create this vision of like there's widespread support in Moldova. However, what actually happens when they do this is it no longer looks like it's widespread. It looks like it's coordinated. It's deliberate. It's no longer, oh, this guy's about for Russia, this guy's for Russia, this guy over here is for Russia. Now it's a block. And they basically are showing their cards at this point in time. This may backfire on Russia if it goes the way I'm expecting, because by putting themselves such a target on their backs, they're now going to be much easier to see, monitor, and for the citizenry to understand what they're doing. Russian propagandist Simonian suggests supporting the Moldovan opposition forces. It is necessary for Russia to expand instead of conquering, she says. In other words, they want people to voluntarily join into the Ruski Mir. And she is not wrong in the sense of it's far better for people to join voluntarily. In fact, most people, if you look at NATO, people aren't forced to join NATO. The pressure they might receive to join NATO usually comes from outside forces that are against them, not from the NATO members themselves. Let's go ahead and move on to the front lines where we've got some things going on here. Kirill Budanov states that Ukraine faces difficult situations starting mid-May. He did later clarify that this does not refer solely to the situation on the front lines, but the world situation and the situation in government and in the private sector, as well as the military itself. He is anticipating that things are going to get pretty rough, but he does report that almost none of Russia's original military is left, and now they're fighting anything that Russia can mobilize, which is going to be lower quality than the original stuff. Of course, the original stuff is gone, so there's no point in pining after that. President Zelensky said that Russia will attempt to seize Chasiv Yar by Victory Day. That's May 9th, and this is a significant, symbolically significant date. If they want to be seen as winning. Victory Day, have a big victory for that day, will make a huge difference in Russian morale moving forward. So right now, Ukraine wants to stop that basically in any way they can. Now let's go ahead and go into the changes on the front lines. As far as the changes to the deep state map, they only show Otsoretine, which I've got some additional updates on this even beyond this. This is the area where we had a unit that left their posts, ran away, and the Russians took advantage of it and moved in. Russia does claim to have captured Novomykhailivka, which Ukraine says not true, saying the situation is tense but under control. I am hesitant to accept either side of the story because we do have a he said, she said going on right here. And this is, it's tough. There's some updates as well. I don't believe Russia has all of Novomykhailivka, but they may have more than is comfortable for Ukraine. Over 20,000 Russian troops are trying to storm Chasiv Yar outskirts. This is a vital location. It's a raised location. It's an elevated position, well fortified, but not impregnable. In fact, Russia gained a foothold in Bodanivka near Chasiv Yar. It's the next village over. Not a good sign overall for Ukraine. Now, here's Null Report's overall changes to the front lines. Russians have made it into the center of Otsoretine already. Why? Very simple. Units of a specific mechanized brigade responsible for the defense of the eastern part of Otsoretine abandoned their positions prior to rotation, of which Russia took advantage. Now, my understanding is that a Ukrainian assault brigade was sent in to try and plug the gap. There was heavy fighting, and it looks like they prevented a pure breakthrough. But this is not a good position to be in. Hirivka here, geolocated footage shows Russian advances south of the pond towards Hirivka. Small advances, but they are expecting a bigger push by the end of May towards Kharkov and ultimately Pokrovsk. So that's the situation on the front lines. And, I haven't done this for a while, so I'm going to back it out a little bit and kind of give you the overall situation here. I'm going to have to bust out some old software here, so bear with me. There it is. Okay. We have not seen any major updates in the Kupiansk area up here in quite some time. So I'm considering this to be basically stable at this point. That doesn't, my determination doesn't change the front lines, but it sounds like Ukraine really did a major pushback in this area, knocked out a bunch of armories and things like that, a bunch of ammo dumps, managed to kind of stabilize that situation up there, push them back quite a bit. There's been also no major changes over here near the Serbiansky forestry area or Tyranny. There were some updates last week, but once again, the whole situation around Tyranny always seems to do this thing where it's like, oh, the Russians are really pushing right now. And then a couple of days go by, and then the Ukrainians have pushed them all the way back to the starting positions. So no changes there. Bakhmut area, which is actually now working towards Chasiv Yar. This is a tough area for Ukraine right now. The Russians are pushing forward. Avdiivka area and Donetsk, Russians are again still pushing and moving forward in small, tiny bits. Nothing major is being reported at all. No major changes across these areas right here. Robotina, there's some potential advances around this area, but nothing fixed or clear in that area. And there's still the bridgeheads over here at Krinky, where the Ukrainians are still holding positions around Krinky and around the bridge, whose name has escaped me at the moment. But that's kind of the overall situation on the front lines right now. We haven't pulled that out in quite some time, but I hope that kind of helps you visualize what we're thinking right now. And I'm ready to go into, let's see. Hold on, I'm going back and reading the comments here. Chasiv Yar is safe. We are in the mud season, so all progress should be slow now. I believe that, Paul. There's still progress being made by the Russians, though, and it's being reported each day. So it may be safe for now, but that doesn't mean it's going to stay safe, at least from the information I'm seeing. Russia now faces the $60 billion from the U.S., the EU artillery initiative, and F-16s all coming together in June. Ukraine appears to be mobilizing faster than the Russians, and this is one of the advantages Ukraine has. They have got they can walk and chew gum at the same time. They can act on multiple fronts without risking losing track of anything else. So yeah, absolutely true. Steve says Patriot missiles and batteries add F-16s, and Russian aviation becomes much more dangerous. In fact, when Ukraine had a lot of the interceptor missiles and things like that, it was pretty clear that that they had no trouble at all keeping Russian aviation out of their airspace. So the fact that it's changed at this point in time is an indication that Ukraine's air defenses are strapped at the moment. So they need those missiles, interceptors, and equipment as soon as possible. Lucille says, do you have the info and time to give us the facts on Israel's retaliatory response to Iran's attack and which countries it affected? I don't have the details right now. I did see some items on it. The overarching view I have of it is that an air defense unit outside of a Iranian nuclear facility was destroyed. No other damage that has been reported that I've seen beyond that. But again, that's overall just going from memory from what I've seen as I've piddled around and done my research for today. Overall, unless Iran does something stupid, which I wouldn't put it past them, I think that situation is relatively stable right now. However, I expect that Israel still has more to say on the topic, and I will keep an eye out for it and see if I can get you a good update for next time. And Paul adds, acknowledges Stephen says, yes, air superiority will shift. And that is kind of what we're looking at this point in time, is that if air superiority shifts, it changes the dynamic on the battlefield. It changes it so much that Ukraine being able to shoot down those aircraft will make it so Russia has to pull a new trick out of their hat. And they're kind of running out of hats. And they're kind of running out of tricks. So we'll see what happens on that one. All right, let's go ahead and move back over to the interesting extras today. Large-scale floods in China with 110,000 residents already evacuated out of Guangdong province. This is in comparison to Russia's response to the floods, which resulted in no evacuations that we were able to see, and many people having to deal with the consequences on the fly. Record rainfall occurred in the Chinese province. Because of them, the streets of some cities in the province turned into fast rivers. This is what it looks like. And this caught my eye. And we all know that there have been people trying to get out of Ukraine to avoid being mobilized. This is a common issue anytime there's a war with a mobilization or conscription going on. We had the same thing happen in World War II with Americans fleeing to Canada and other places to avoid getting pulled into the military or getting medical waivers, which I'm not going to address here. This Ukrainian got onto an air mattress and floated down the Dnieper River into Belarus and was captured in Belarus. With no passport or information or anything else like that. He was fined 400 rubles for his stunt there. The mattress itself was worth 300 hryvnias, or about $7.5 US. Overall, this is just they charged him with illegally moving goods for smuggling the mattress, the air mattress. So he didn't come to the trial, and he was sentenced in absentia. No clue where he is now. And once again, we're getting into Russian disinformation. Kremlin-controlled media recently circulated a report that Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky allegedly bought the High Grove residence from King Charles III for $20 million. Russian media referred to a site that appeared a few days before the exposure reports were shown on Russian federal channels. This is part of how their disinformation campaign works. They literally set up a website, often that is a mimic or similar to a major news site. It could be Fox or CNN or the Daily Mail or whatever. Looks similar to it, maybe even has a similar URL. And then they put their fake story on that site. Then they point to that fake story. It's how they get their disinformation out there. I think we can rest assured that there was no High Grove residence bought by Vladimir Zelensky. UK Airlines faced GPS jamming in the Baltic region, with suspicion falling on Russia. This has been an ongoing issue, and often the jamming is traced back to Kaliningrad, where the Russians are apparently running their little operation, often out of a ship that's in a harbor there. Russia's representative to the UN says that there's a danger of a new conflict in the Balkans. Now, just for context, so you and I both know what Ivana Strodner is talking about here, Russia is saying that it's being caused by the West. As always, they are pinning all of their blame on the West for their actions in this. So it's clear that Russia wants to open a second front in the Balkans to try and dissuade the West from actually supporting Ukraine. He wants to show that Vladimir Putin wants to show that his will is stronger than the West's, and that if he challenges the West, that the West's will fold. He needs to be proven wrong. And the last thing for today, this corgi by the name of Teddy consumed 20 Kinder chocolate bars with the wrappers and was happy as a clam about it until his owner discovered the missing chocolate. They immediately took him to the veterinarian office and administered proper removal procedures. and this removed the toxic chocolate from the dog. The dog is expected to recover within 24 hours. Uh, it was just really cute, and the story was fun, and so I thought I'd share it with you. The fact is that dogs will get into pretty much anything that gets into their range if you allow them to do so. So that's pretty much everything for today. Is there any other questions before I shut it down? I'll just let it sit for just a minute here. And while it's sitting, I'm going to just go ahead and do a little bit of commentary here. The whole Ukraine aid and foreign aid situation was fascinating to watch. The truth is, it was a display of bipartisanship that we do not see on a very often in this day and age. Literally, they'd have a bill come up, and the Republicans would have somebody stand up and speak to support it. The Democrats, who are supposed to be speaking in opposition, you would use some of their time to speak in support of it. And it would go back to the Republicans, and they'd speak in support of it. And the Democrats would speak in support of it, back and forth for the time allotted, usually 30 minutes. And it was really heartening to see both sides working together for the good of the country, not to score political brownie points, because some of these people are going to pay at the poll. Some of these people will likely find the end of their political lives in these bills. And yet, what a way to go out. What a way to say, my country is more important to me than my job. And that bipartisanship was tremendously, it's something I've not seen in so long. And I am thankful that I got to see it. Then there was like amendments, and we know that many of the amendments that were put forth were deliberately intended to kill the bills. You'd have one person speak on it in opposition, and then there'd be several people, one of them speak on it in favor of this kill the bill amendment, and then several people would speak in actual opposition. Bipartisanship. Amazing to see in this hyper-polarized day and age. All right, last look here at the comments. And Paul, thank you very much. I'm glad you enjoyed the report today, or at least appreciate it. The situation with Ukraine aid is not over yet. So make certain that if you are in the United States and you have a U.S. senator, you want to make sure they know what you think on these bills, and make sure it's well communicated, and ensure they know that you did in fact do in fact want them to support those bills. I sent in my information to my senator, who is a staunch opponent to foreign aid right now. So it will likely fall upon deaf ears. But even so, I could not let it sit without putting in my 2 cents and participating in the process in as much as I am able to at this time. Steve talks about, I don't know about air superiority, but losses of Russian strategic assets will continue, i.e. put traveling strategic bombers. Yes, that the loss of more of their strategic assets will put a real crimp on Russia's abilities to prosecute this war effectively. And on that note, I think that's everything for today. Thank you for joining me. I'm glad you were here, and I appreciate you guys being here anytime we have one of these reports. It makes all the difference in the world. And to have your comments and your questions, you guys bring a new dimension to these reports that I absolutely appreciate. So thank you very much. You have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next one.